Chapter 2. Dobie's Warning. Harry managed not to shout out, but it was a close thing. The little creature on the bed had large bat-like ears, bulging green eyes the size of tennis balls. Harry knew instantly that this was what had been watching him in the garden hedge this morning. As they stared at each other, Harry heard Dudley's voice from the hall. "May I take your coats, Mr. and Mrs. Mason?" The creature slipped off the bed and bowed so low that the end of his long, thin nose touched the carpet. Harry noticed that it was wearing what looked like to be an old pillowcase with rips for arms and leg holes. Hello," Harry said nervously. "Harry Potter?" the creature in a high-pitched voice. Harry was sure that carried downstairs. "So long as Dobby wanted to meet you, sir. Such an honor it is." Thank you," Harry said, edging on the wall, sinking down into his desk chair next to Hedwig, who was asleep in her large cage, and wanted to ask, "What are you?" but he thought that was rather rude, so instead he said, "Who are you?" "Dobby, sir. Just Dobby. Dobby, the house elf," said the creature. "Oh, really?" said Harry. I don't want to be rude or anything, but this isn't a great time for me to have a house elf in my bedroom." And Petunia's high, false laugh sounded from the living room, and the elf hung his head. "No, I'm not. I'm not that I'm not pleased to meet you," Harry said quickly, "but, is there a particular reason you're here?" "Oh, yes, sir," said Dobby earnestly. "Tommy had come to you, sir. It's difficult, sir. Nobody wonders where to begin." "Well, sit down," said Harry politely, pointing at the bed. To his horror, the elf burst out in tears, very noisy tears. "Oh, sit down!" he wailed. "Never, never, ever, ever!" Harry thought he heard voices downstairs falter. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to offend you or anything." "Offend Dobby?" choked the elf. "Dobby has never been asked to sit down by any wizard like an equal." Harry tried to say "shh" and look comforting at the same time. He ushered Dobby back to where he was hiccoughing, looking like a large but very ugly doll. At last he managed to control himself, and sat there with his great eyes fixed on Harry, in an expression of watery adoration. "You can't have met many decent wizards," said Harry, trying to cheer him up. Dobby shook his head. Then, without warning, he leapt up and started banging his head furiously on the window, shouting, "Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby!" "Don't! What are you doing?" Harry hissed, springing up and pulling Dobby back to his bed. Hedwig had woken up now with a rather particularly loud screech, and was beating his wings wildly on the bars of the cage. "Dobby had to punish himself," the elf, who had gone slightly cross-eyed. "Dobby almost spoke ill of his family, sir." "Your family?" "The wizard family Dobby serves, sir. Dobby is a house elf, bound to serve one house and one family forever." "Do they know you're here?" Harry asked curiously. Dobby shuddered. "No, no, sir. Dobby will have to punish himself most grievously for coming out to see you. Dobby will have to shut his ears in the oven door for this, if they ever knew, sir." "But they won't even notice if you shut your ears in the oven door?" "Dobby doubts it, sir. Dobby is always punishing himself for something, sir. They let Dobby get on with it. Sometimes they remind me to do extra punishments." "But they don't leave. Why don't you leave? Escape? House elf must be set free, sir. All the family will ever set Dobby free. Dobby will serve the family until he dies, sir." Harry stared. "And I thought I had it bad staying here for another 4 weeks," he said. "This makes the Dursleys sound almost human." "Can't anyone help you? Can I?" Almost at once Harry wished he hadn't spoken. Dobby dissolved again into wails of gratitude. "Please," Harry whispered frantically, "please be quiet. If the Dursleys hear anything, if they know you're here—" Harry Potter asks if he can help Dobby. Dobby has had your greatness, but your goodness Dobby was never knew. Harry, who was feeling distinctly hot in the face, whatever you've heard about my greatness is a load of rubbish. I'm not even top of the year at Hogwarts. That's Hermione, But he stopped quickly because thinking about Hermione was painful. Harry Potter, that's humble and modest, said Dobby reverently, with orb-like eyes aglow. Harry Potter speaks not of his triumph over he who must not be named. Voldemort? Said Harry. Dobby clapped his hands over his ears and moaned, Oh, you speak the name, sir! Speak not the name! Sorry, said Harry quickly. I know lots of people don't like it. My friend Ron. He stopped again, thinking about Ron was painful too. Dobby leaned toward Harry. His eyes were wide as headlights. Dobby Hotel, he said hoarsely. Then Harry Potter met the Dark Lord for a second time just weeks ago. That Harry Potter escaped yet again. Harry nodded, and Dobby's eyes suddenly shone with tears. Ah, sir, he gasped, dabbing his face with the corner of his grubby pillowcase he was wearing. Harry Potter is a valiant and bold. He has braved so many dangers already, but Dobby has to protect Harry Potter, to warn him. Even if he does, he has to shut his ears in the oven door later. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts. There was a silence broken in the chink of knives and forks from downstairs and the distant rumble of Uncle Vernon's voice. What? Harry stammered. But I've got to go back. Term starts on September 1st. It's all that's keeping me going. You don't know what it's like here. I don't belong here. I belong in your world, at Hogwarts. No, 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 no! Squeaked Dobby, shaking his head so hard that his ears flapped. Harry Potter must stay where he is safe. He isn't too great, too good to lose. If Harry Potter goes back to Hogwarts, he will be in mortal danger. Why? Said Harry in surprise. There's a plot, Harry Potter. A plot to make the most terrible things happen at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry this year, whispered Dobby, suddenly trembling all over. Dobby has known for months. Sir Harry Potter must not put himself in peril. You are too important, sir. What terrible things? Said Harry asked. Who's plotting them? Dobby made a funny choking noise and then banged his head frantically on the wall. All right, Harry cried, grabbing the elf to stop him. You can't tell me, I understand. But why are you warning me? A sudden unpleasant thought struck him. Hang on. This hasn't got anything to do with sorry. You know who, has it? You should just shake a nod, he added hastily to Dobby's head, tilted worryingly towards the wall again. Slowly Dobby shook his head. Not him who must be named, sir. But Dobby's eyes were wide, and he seemed trying to give Harry a hint. Harry, however, was completely lost. He hasn't got a brother, has he? Dobby shook his head. His eyes were wider than ever. Well, then, I can't think of anyone else who would have the chance making horrible things happen at Hogwarts, said Harry. There's Dumbledore, for one thing. You know who Dumbledore is, don't you? Dobby bowed his head. Albus Dumbledore is the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever had. Dobby knows it, sir. Dobby has heard Dumbledore's powers. Rival of he who must not be named. At the height of his strength, sir. But, sir, Dobby's voice dropped in an urgent whisper. There's a Powers that Dumbledore doesn't know. Powers no decent wizard. And before Harry could stop him, Dobby bounded off the bed, seized Harry's desk lamp, and started beating himself around the head with ear-splitting yelps. A sudden silence fell downstairs. 2 seconds later, Harry, heart shuddering madly, Uncle Vernon was coming into the hall, calling, Dudley must have left on the television again. The little tyke. Quick, in the closet, hissed Harry, suffering. Dobby shutting the door, finally himself into the bed just for the door handle turned. He burst into the kitchen to find Harry rigid with shock, covered from head to toe with Aunt Petunia's. Oops, I skipped a page. Oops. There we go. What in the devil are you doing? Said Uncle Vernon through gritted teeth, and horrible close to Harry. You've just ruined the punchline of my Japanese gopher joke. One more sound out of you and you'll wish you'd never been born, boy. He stomped, flat-footed, from the room, shaking Harry, let Dobby out of the closet. See what it's like here, he said. See why I've got to go back to Hogwarts? It's the only place I've got. Well, I think I've got friends. Friends who don't even write, Harry Potter? Dobby said slyly. I expect that you've been. Wait a minute, said Harry, frowning. How do you know my friends haven't been writing me? Dobby shuffled his feet. Harry Potter mustn't be angry with Dobby. Dobby did the best. Have you been stopping my letters? Dobby has them right here, sir, said the elf, stepping nimbly out from Harry's reach. He pulled a thick wad of envelopes from inside the pillowcase he was wearing. Harry could make out the Hermione's neat writing, Ron's untidily scrawl, even a scribble that looked like it was from the Hogwarts gamekeeper Hagrid. Dobby blinked anxiously at Harry Potter. Harry Potter mustn't be angry, Dobby hoped. If Harry Potter thought his friends were forgotten him, Harry Potter might not want to go back to school, sir. Harry wasn't listening. He made a grab for the letters, but Dobby jumped out of his reach. Harry Potter will have them, sir, if he gives Dobby his word that he will not return to Hogwarts. Ah, sir, this is danger. You must not face. Say you won't go back. No, said Harry angrily. Give me my letters, my friend's letters. Then Harry Potter leaves. Dobby no choice. The elf sadly, before Harry could move, Dobby had darted to the bedroom door, pulled open, and sprinted down the stairs. Mouth dry, stomach lurching, Harry sprang to his feet after him, trying not to make a sound. He jumped the last 6 steps of the landing, cat-like, onto the hall carpet, looking around for Dobby. From the dining-room table, he heard Uncle Vernon saying, Tell Petunia that very funny story about the American plumbers, Mr. Mason. She's been dying to hear. Harry ran up into the hall of the kitchen, felt his stomach disappear, and Petunia's masterpiece pudding of the mountain of cream and sugared violets was floating up near the ceiling. On top of the cupboard in the corner crouched Dobby. No, cried Harry. Please, they'll kill me. Harry Potter must say he's not going back to school. Dobby, please. Say it, sir. I can't. Dobby gave him a tragic look. Then Dobby must do it, for Harry Potter's own good. The pudding fell onto the floor with a heart-stopping crash. Cream splattered in the windows, the walls, and shattered. With a crack like whip, Dobby vanished, and there were screams from the dining room, and Uncle Vernon burst into the kitchen to find Harry, rigid with shock, covered from head to foot with Aunt Petunia's pudding. At first he looked as though Uncle Vernon would manage to gloss the whole thing over. Just our nephew, very disturbed, meeting the strangers upstairs. We've kept him upstairs. He shooed the shocked Masons back into the dining room, promised Harry he would flay him within an inch of his life when the Masons had left, and then handed him a mop. And Aunt Petunia had done some ice cream out of the freezer, and Harry was still shaking, started scrubbing the kitchen clean. Uncle Vernon might still have been able to make his deal if it hadn't been for that owl. Aunt Petunia was passing around the box of after-dinner mints when a huge barn owl swooped through the dining room window, dropped the letter on Mrs. Mason's head, and swooped out again. Mrs. Mason screamed like a banshee and ran from the house, sprouting it like lunatics. Mr. Mason stayed just long enough to tell the Dursleys that his wife was mortally afraid of birds, all shapes, all sizes, and asked whether this was their idea of a joke. Harry stood in the kitchen, clutching the mop for support. Uncle Vernon advanced on him in demonic glare and tiny eyes. Read it! He hissed evilly, brandishing the letter of the owl he had delivered. Go on, read it! Harry took it, and did not contain a birthday greeting. Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that hover charm was used in your place of residence this evening at 12 minutes past 9. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to do spells outside of school, and further spell work on your part may leave you expulsion from the school. Decree reasonable restrictions of underage sorcery in 1875, paragraph C, we would ask you to remember that any magical activity risked by any members of the non-magical community, Muggles, is a serious offense under Section 13 in the International Confederation of Warlocks Statute of Secrecy. Enjoy your holiday. Sincerely, Malfidia Hoprick, Improper Use of Magic Officer, Ministry of Magic. Harry looked up from the letter and gulped. You did not tell me you weren't to use magic outside of school, said Uncle Vernon with a mad gleam dancing in his eyes. Forgot to mention it. Slipped my mind, I dare say. He has been bearing down on Harry like a bulldog, all his teeth bared. Well, I've got news for you, boy. I'm locking you up. You are never going back to that school, never. And if you ever try magic yourself out, they'll expel you. And laughing like a maniac, he dragged Harry back upstairs. Uncle Vernon was as bad at his word at following the morning. He paid a man to fit bars on Harry's window. He himself fitted the cat flap on the bedroom door, so small amounts of food could be pushed inside it all 3 times a day. They had let Harry use the bathroom morning and evening, and that was it. Otherwise, he was locked up in their room around the clock. 3 days later, the Dursleys were showing no sign of relenting. Harry couldn't see any way out of the situation, so he lay on his bed watching the sun sinking behind the bars of the window, and would miserably what was going to happen to him. What was the good of magicking himself out of his room if Hogwarts was going to expel him for doing it? Yet life at Privet Drive had reached an all-time low. Now the Dursleys knew they weren't going to wake up with fruit bats. As fruit bats, he had lost his only weapon. Dobby might have saved Harry from horrible happenings at Hogwarts, but the way things were going, he'd probably starve to death anyway. The cat flap of Aunt Petunia had appeared, pushing a bowl of caramel or canned soup into the room. Harry, whose insides were acting with hunger, jumped up off his bed and seized it. The soup was stone cold, but he drank it anyways with one gulp. Then he crossed the room to Hedwig's cage, tipped the soggy vegetable at the bottom of the bowl into her empty food tray. She ruffled her feathers and gave him a look of deep disgust. It's no good turning your beak up at it. That's all we've got, said Harry grimly. He put his empty bowl back on the floor next to the cat flap, lay back down on his bed, somehow even hungrier than he had been before the soup. Supposing he was still alive another 4 weeks, what would happen if he didn't turn up at Hogwarts? Would someone be sent to see what had happened to had him come back? Would they be able to make the Dursleys let him go? The room was growing dark, exhausted, stomach rumbling, mind spinning over the same unanswerable questions. Harry fell into an uneasy sleep. He dreamed that he was on a show in a zoo, with a card reading "Underage Wizard" attached to the cage. People goggled at him through the bars, he lay weak and starving and weak in a bed of straw. He saw Dobby's face, and the crowd shouted out, asking for help. But Dobby called, Harry Potter is safe there, sir, and vanished. And then the Dursleys appeared, and Dudley rattled the bars of the cage, laughing at him. Stop it, Harry muttered, rattling sound of the saw heard. Leave me alone! Cut it out! I'm trying to sleep! He opened his eyes to the moonlight was shining through his bars of the window, and then someone was goggling through the bars at him. A freckle-faced, red-haired, long-nosed somebody. Ron Weasley was outside Hetty's window.